very little runway left, $16 million. So I go out into the marketplace and raise a Series B, $10 million. Right? But we raised that Series B at a $230 million valuation. Right? And by the time we sold the company to IBM, we still had the same money in the bank, actually more than what we started. Right? So the one advice I give to every friend, everybody that's looking, to every colleague, every person that I've met, when you look to build a startup company, is be very frugal with cash. Right? Look, we achieved, as Blade Network Technologies, a bigger footprint in the marketplace on the back of $30 million than 4 Stent Networks did after raising $540 million. And a big part of that sort of came from being very, very frugal with the cash position. The other thing I learned, and this was thankfully through advisors, through building up a network in groups like this, but I learned a lot from friends, which is all about avoiding poison terms, right? Be it preferred dividends, cumulative dividends, participating preferred terms, etc. And it took me, so there were 2 reasons why I raised the Series B. One was because I felt a little poorer after buying back Nortel shares, and we were heading into a global financial crisis. But the other reason was I needed to get rid of some poison terms that were there in the Series A round. And that's why I went out to strategic investors, which, by the way, are a fantastic source of funding, right? Remember, a place like Japan is not easy to do business with. NEC's only, in their 125-year history, only led rounds 3 times. They have never led a round in a down economic environment, and they led our Series B round. But part of the benefit that came with that was it gave me the opportunity to get rid of some poison terms. Right? Look, the venture community, good as they are, and a fantastic source of funding, and I don't fault them for what they do, don't have the entrepreneur's interests at heart, don't care about the entrepreneur, and do not certainly care about the customers that we are so passionate about. And so, making sure that things are not taken away from the individuals that are building up that sweat equity is incredibly important. Third lesson I learned was what drives valuation. Okay, and I'm going to share with you, right, this chart afterwards as to what our valuation as a company was. But what I learned was valuation is a function of a few things. Top line growth. You want to take your company public, which is why, we were able to solicit Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, and UBS, the 3 largest, banks to sort of contend for our business, was because we were posting 25% year-on-year growth. Okay. Gross margins. Having a 6 as your lead number on gross margins is a lot better than having a 4, is a lot better than having a 3 or a 2, etc., because it has a multiplicative effect on your valuation, either in the public market or if you're trying to sell to another company. I beg your pardon? Yes, you have to be good Wall Street market, bad Wall Street market, or whatever. You have to be somewhere between 20-25%. Otherwise, you're not, a growth stock. Customer concentration. We had a real problem in this area. We were supplying network switches to a couple of the world's leading server vendors, right? Between HP and IBM, they control 80% of the blade server market. So I had a real customer concentration problem, but finding creative ways to diversify from that is incredibly important. Because if you can't diversify, and one customer walks away, people view that as a big, big risk. Having visibility and predictability to your business, okay, being able to walk into the office every morning as the CEO or as the VP of sales of the company and be able to know how much cash you have in the bank, how much business you did the next day, and being able to accurately predict when your quarter is going to end, you know, is incredibly, incredibly important. A lot of people at IBM were surprised when I walked in on January 1, 2011, as an employee of the company and sent a message across to a bunch of executives telling them exactly when we would end, December 31, 2011. And we landed exactly there, right? But we had that predictability not on January 1, 2011, we had that predictability for a considerable period of time, and that is incredibly important. Having systems and processes in place so you can get information at the tip of your fingers. Please, if there's one area you want to invest in that area. There's plenty of good startup companies in that area that can do a good job. You don't have to go put in a $10 million SAP or Oracle system to get information at the tip of your fingers. You know, you will be $10 million poorer, but you'll never get that information that you're looking for. But there are companies out there that will help you do that. And really, thinking and acting like a public company CEO a lot before you go public is incredibly important. Right? It's sort of like what my boys do. Act like 20-year-olds while they're still in their teens. That's true. So this is a chart that sort of shows how over a period of time, stock prices of different companies, from 2006 to 2010, including the downturn, how the stock of some very well-known companies in the world, from IBM, HP, Apple, Google, Cisco, Dell, Voltaire, Brocade, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and Blade Network Technologies behaved over that period. And you can see what ended up happening without, I am not at liberty to disclose the exact sale value of the company and stuff like that, but you know, that's a chart that has been shared in the public before, so it gives you an idea of where the technologies ended up compared to a lot of companies. And the reason why we ended up where we ended up was because we were maniacally focused on some of this stuff. And one of the best decisions I took, ladies and gentlemen, was to bring in place a CFO that I didn't know from a bar of soap, but this guy really ended up being a tremendous partner, a very trusted advisor to me to help put some of these things in place. He's going to surface here very shortly as CFO of an incredible systems company that can help you entrepreneurs put in place some incredible systems to prepare yourself for that next level of growth, right? This next thing was, some people call it a flash of the blinding obvious. I describe it in the following crude manner. When the world was an unenlightened place and I was in high school or college or whatever, the best way to attract the attention of a young lady was to own a hot car. Okay? And the world became a more enlightened place. And those hot ladies decided that they were better off owning their own hot car, so they didn't have to drive around in cars with jerks like me. Right? So this was sort of a learning in coming very early to the recognition that your interests as an entrepreneur and the interests of the people that work for you and have placed their trust in you are not necessarily aligned with those of your investors. That's not necessarily a bad thing. People have different goals and objectives, but you have to be mature about it, and you really have to be very tactful in managing that conflict. And there is no better time that this conflict shows up when you are either taking the company IPO, when the investor wants to put all of their stock in the IPO offering and not letting any of the management put their stock in, or not letting any of the employees put their stock in, or when you're selling off to a larger company, right? So one of the pieces I really want to share with you is say, look, aside of all the great work that you folks do in terms of inventing great technology, building great products, delighting customers all day long, is please spend some time thinking about this important issue. Because it is going to happen. It happens in every single situation. And spending time ahead of this stuff happening and developing the tactics and the smarts and the finesse on how to handle this conflict is going to be incredibly important. It's going to make the investors happy, it's going to make the employees happy, it's going to make you very, very happy. And if you can sort of have the drum roll, the last one that I have here, and I will open it up for questions for you folks, is I recognize there was not a day for a number of years when I didn't stand up in front of the mirror and ask myself the question and say, why did I leave this expatriate life at HP? Right? Fantastic job, fantastic perks, lots of expenses paid for, an executive that had moved across from Australia to Hong Kong, eventually to the US. Life can be pretty good working for a company like HP, right? And then I got lured into the startup world, and I had my first failure. Getting your first job out of HP is incredibly simple. It's when you fail at that job and you are looking for the next one is when reality hits home, right? And that next one really, really has to work for you. And things can get tough, right? And there was many days when I buried my head in the pillow worrying about what would happen and how we would make the mortgage and how we would work this through and how we would maintain the lifestyle and how I would put my kids through school and how we would fulfill these sorts of commitments. But I have to tell you, at the end of the day, this is not. It's amazing how friends and colleagues that learned about Blade Network Technology's successful exit come up to me and say, I'm so-and-so, and I worked at such and such large company for 20 years or 30 years. I'm really looking to get into the startup world because I understand that money falls through the sky and it's incredibly simple and it can get really wealthy. And I sit these people down and I try and talk about some of this stuff and saying, you know, if you don't have a gut made of steel and you are not willing to take a lot of abuse and hurt, don't even bother getting started. Because those go-go days, you know, that we knew as the internet bubble are gone and they're never coming back. And life in a startup world is not quite the fairy tale that people like hearing about, you know, when you hear of successful exits. And the two things that I personally drew a lot of inspiration from was a book called Journey of a Hulk Merchant. You know, sailing is often referred to as a rich man's sport. I was never a rich person, but happened to attend a military school that afforded me the opportunity to go sail, so learned a few things about it. As a result, became friendly with somebody by the name of Neil Peterson, the author of this book, who was the first man of African origin origin to sail around the world solo. And this was a person that was born with a missing hip. And he sailed around the world solo in a boat built in his backyard with nails and supplies that you would buy at Home Depot, right? And this is an individual that, you know, accomplished something that Mr. Ellison is trying to do now, you know, with his hundreds of millions of dollars invested in sailboats, is to sail around the world solo businesses. So quite the inspirational story. It's a very, very good read. I even brought Neil Peterson out to talk to the employees of the company and all of their spouses at our very first annual event, because he really sparked a lot of inspiration. I've gone back and read his book a number of times, as has every employee in the company that I provided the book to, because it really speaks to this issue, and something that I have gone back and watched at least at last count about 25 times. This movie called Men of Honor, and because at down moments in my professional career, and there were plenty of them, there were more down moments than up moments. I would often go back, when I was really feeling weak in the knees, and either turn to one of these two resources. I'm sure you folks have your own resources, and we want to turn to those. So I know I've taken up a lot of your time, folks, but I'd love to open it up for any questions or comments or thoughts that you might have. But I couldn't quite make it entertaining for you folks, as was advertised in the India West, but hopefully I've been able to leave you back with some important lessons that I have learned. Yeah? Yes, sir.
Very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a very interesting story, and it's a little different than most of the entrepreneurs describe. I saw that you gave all your 10 points, what are the things to watch for. And it's not exactly what you have to say that, about the VCs and other things, which is a little bit the negative side in your statements. But one thing my personal interest is, I do have the similar experiences. I've started 2 companies, and now I'm about to register my 3rd company. What did you say about the independent counsel? Because my experience is, even if you have your independent counsel, which you have started with, but when the VCs come, it's their word. They control it.
Well, that's why
I didn't understand, what did you mean by that?
Well, I guess you have to pick counsel. See, one of the things that all of us folks, of Asian origin, right? We come from a part of the world where your word means a lot. Okay? If you make a commitment to somebody, you will fulfill that commitment if it's the last thing you do before you die. That's how we are all raised, right? I'm not trying to say this in a disparaging way about other parts of the world, but at the end of the day, the commercial world here is very litigious and is very different, let's say culturally, to where, to how we were brought up. And you tend to, coming from that world, you tend to take things for granted, right? And the counsel I want to share with all of you folks is say, look, at the end of the day, counsel's job, be it internal counsel or the outside counsel retained by an enterprise, is to serve the interests of the enterprise first. And it takes a very seasoned and very smart entrepreneur, more seasoned than smart, because you have to get burned a couple of times to realize this, to recognize where that is not happening. But it's one of the single biggest things that can hurt an entrepreneur, hurt his or her equity inside the company, and hurt the interests companies that have worked incredibly hard to build value in that environment. So your counsel is as important a person as your CFO or your VP of sales. Make that decision very carefully. If you can't trust your kids with that person, then you've made a wrong choice.
Vikram, great talk. I solved the council problem. I married mine. So she's my lawyer for the company.
There you go. There you go. That's one way to fix the issue.
So I appreciate a lot of things you said. My question is I was wondering if you could share with the audience some of the inflection points, because growth is great. But what are some of the key times when everything looked like it wasn't going to happen, and this is what happened, and then you went up, and at least a couple of those.
Yeah, I mean, we had some inflection points. Technology has a way of getting to price points and technology shifts where all of your economic models break down. We had one of those things happen to us very soon after we were founded. February 2006, matter of fact, the moment occurred in October of 2006, and we, took a deep dive. And of course, through the global financial crisis, we had that moment as well. But the financial discipline that we had built inside the company, and this thing that I refer to as a spiritual discipline about making sure that we were watchful with every penny that was spent. I would not spare any expense on the employees. We were making sure that the employees were well paid, extremely well paid and compensated. We had some sales reps in the organization that were making over $1 million. And we celebrated that, but we made sure through all of this process that all of the wasteful expenditure that companies sometimes get caught up in were completely away. Because it kind of comes back to that point that I made about it's all about the people. Right? You've got to invest in the people, because people will find customers, people will build technology, people will fix problems, people will buy your products. That's where all of your money is going to go to. But like any business, we had our down moments, but the thing that saved us was the financial discipline.
Vikram, this is Suresh. So what's your next step after this?
I knew somebody was going to ask me that. Would you believe it if I told you that I told her that we were going to move to Hong Kong and we were going to live there for 5 years, and I was moving, I'd have this big discussion with my hiring manager in California. I was trying to explain as a final desperate attempt at saying, look, even the curtains have not gone up in the apartment in Hong Kong. How can you move me? Well, look, life is too short, so you have to sort of take it a day at a time, a week at a time. At this point in time, I am gainfully and very happily employed by IBM, heading up their system networking business, and I have a set of commitments that I need to fulfill in that particular area, and help great colleagues at IBM. We are doing exceptionally well. It's been a successful acquisition for the company. But there's a reason why startups exist. We were just having this conversation over dinner. I said, startups exist and Silicon Valley exists because there are things that a large company just doesn't know how to do. If larger companies in the world were the most efficiently run organizations, then we would not be sitting here and having this wonderful food and this this very patient conversation that you folks have afforded me the opportunity to have with you. So, I've always been a renegade. You know, sometime in the future, somewhere I will always go do things. If not on my own, maybe with my wife, my children, or... Yes, ma'am. My good friend from Cisco, competitor from Cisco.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask a competitive question. Thanks, Vikram, this was fantastic. So I have a retrospective question for you. If you had a chance, if you did not have to change all those clauses in your Series A to in your Series B, and with the $16 million in the bank, well, if you were to do it again, would you not take a Series B round? And the reason I ask the question is, be it angel or be it Series A, be it Series E, whatever level it is, the question is, when do you decide you need funding? Because frankly, you know, if you can do it without it, you might as well go do it that way.
No, that's a fantastic question, and you know, I often talk about this with a close business colleague and advisor, Clive Surfleet, who's been a close friend over the years and was part of the Blade journey and now works alongside me at IBM. And I remember having many a conversation with him at the Duke of Edinburgh when we were trying to talk about this whole spin out from Nortel and where to raise money and who to go to and all this sort of stuff. And you fast forward, right? And you say, we started life with 30 million, but when we sold, we had 30 million cash in the balance sheet. So you go, it's like, damn it, why didn't I just put up my house, you know, on the market, and why didn't Clyde put up his house, and why didn't Shailesh put up his house, and why didn't a few other friends put up their houses on the market? We could have done this all by ourselves, but hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? So you never think about it that way, because you hear all these stories of people burning through tons of cash. You know, the story we were concerned about is how much cash we would burn through given Force 10's experience, right? And I certainly didn't have $560 million to put through, you know, so did we envision that we'd be able to get by with just 1.5 round? And I call it a 1.5 round because the second round was really just to replenish cash that I'd spent on doing a share buyback. But when we were going out to do our Series B, we had bought shares cheap, and we were gonna sell shares at a very high price. So it was a good thing from that perspective. But had we envisioned this before? Really, no. And I think any entrepreneur that tells you that he's got his, you know, plan all laid out, I think he's probably not being honest with you. But the best thing that I can advise people to do is say, if you're frugal with cash to begin with, and spend it like every penny's got to feel like a manhole cover that will break your foot, then I think you'll end up in the right place, and that's what we ended up doing. I mean, I remember, to narrate a very personal story with you, so I remember flying down to Orange County with my investors, and you know, you can take a flight from San Jose down to John Wayne Airport, and it costs you $80 if you take an early enough flight. You know, you get a bill from our investors saying $1,700 for the same flight. I had to turn around and tell my CFO, you will pay him back $80 less postage. Was that a difficult conversation? It was a very difficult conversation, but I think that's what part of the entrepreneur's job is to be the bearer of bad news with the investors and saying, you know, you expect them to treat the money that has been invested in the company exactly the same way as they expect you to treat it, which is with a lot of caution. Sir?
Yeah, what was the sustainable business advantage?
What was the sustainable business advantage that you saw that Nortel didn't? And can you talk about that?
Well, I think one of the things that we realized very early in the networking space was you had a lot of these companies, you know, Bay Networks, before Nortel, you know, NET, a number of players in this marketplace, you know, Foundry that got acquired by Brocade, a bunch of other players that were all pricing within 10 to 15% of Cisco. That were all offering pretty much the same level of functionality. Right? When that sort of stuff happens, people want to buy product from the dominant supplier. And Cisco was the beneficiary of that. One of the things that we really came in and tried to do was disrupt things on multiple fronts. Pricing. So our value proposition was, we introduced a product, it had to have an order of magnitude better latency than Cisco. One order of magnitude. It had to have 80 to 100% less power consumption than our closest competitor. And it had to have a price point that was at least half. Because now you are starting to really get people to sit up on the edge of their seat and say, you are that much faster, you are that much cheaper, and you are that much more energy efficient. If you just stay within 10 to 15%, nobody wants to take a move away. So you really have to shock the market. That's what we tried to do.
At the time, Blade was spun out of Nortel. Presumably the IP was owned by Nortel, and how was that managed? How did you get ownership of the IP?
Well, I can't quite sort of get into all of the details, you know, given some of the confidentiality, but I will say this, right? It was not an easy exercise. IP is never an easy exercise. And this is one of the reasons why lesson number 7 on there said, hire yourself a counsel that you can trust your children. Because aside of all the valuation and all the contracts on selling and IPO and deployment contracts and all this sort of stuff, one of the areas where good counsel is supposed to be helping you is in the intellectual property area. Now, fortunately, in our case, after I learned that lesson, I went out and recruited, even though we were based in Silicon Valley, I went out and hired somebody I believe to be one of the finest intellectual property attorneys in this country. Is a gentleman by the name of Tom Gelati. And if you Google him, he runs his practice as Gelati Legal, based out of North Carolina, Raleigh, North Carolina, and ex-Nortel attorney. So he and I had worked together when I was part of Nortel, so he had some understanding of the business. But after he left Nortel, and of course we were separated from Nortel, and I'd had my lesson number 7, you know, instead of spending money with the big sandhill legal firms, I went out and worked with Tom, and we did some incredible legal work. Incredible legal work. Right? Everybody's heard about patent trolls in the networking world. You know, they came after Cisco, they came after HP, they came after just about every big networking company. They didn't come after Blade.
So just want to know, At the time you guys spun out in 2006, how many customers did you have through this either in 2006, and when did you guys get profitable?
Well, given the cash story I told you, we didn't have too much of a runway, so we got profitable very, very quickly. But as I said on one of the earlier slides, and I will be circulating a version of the slides out to you, taking out the Dilbert cartoon and everything else, so Mrs. Scott Adams doesn't come after me, and correcting the typo that I had on that first slide. We had about 350 of the Fortune 500 companies using our products. We had over 10 million ports in production deployment. That was connecting about 16% of the world's servers and storage products in the data center. So we scaled very, very, very rapidly. But in no short part because of the routes to market that we had. And our routes to market were companies like IBM, HP, NEC, Teradata, Silicon Graphics, Netezza Corporation, prior to their acquisition by IBM. And of course, all of these things were aided by Cisco's, efforts in the marketplace, brilliant efforts in the marketplace to piss off every single server company by getting into the server market. So sometimes it's not just what you do brilliantly, but it's the other guy's moves to piss everybody else off in the market. So that day happened on, I think it was March 16th, 2009. I wrote a blog saying this was the best day in Blade's life.
Sorry, it's a little different question. But
Yes, sir.
Do you think Cisco's move into the server market is a add-on, or do you think well, they're working with Cisco and that is?
I wrote a blog the day this happened. You can find it on the IBM website. It's in my typical style, 10 reasons why this was a bad move. And I think those 10 reasons are still very valid.
So it was a great move for you though?
It was, I think it was a brilliant. We just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah, so Vikram, thanks a lot for this inspiring presentation. So I've been in with 3 companies that you mentioned, Force10, and I totally agree with you on the way we were burning cash, Foundry, and now Brocade. So one thing is, I envy you because we were hoping that IBM will buy us, and because there were rumors floating around that IBM was seriously looking to get into networking, and Brocade was at the time one of the companies which had both data center and enterprise, because they bought Foundry. So the question I have is, for people who want to be entrepreneurs, so what are the data center networking challenges that are yet to be solved that we can take a fresh look?
What's the next big idea? It's funny you should mention that.
Last question to him, you already asked it.
Because September of 2010 we got acquired, and of course I was right in the middle of all those acquisition discussions. So you can imagine I was spending a lot of time on the East Coast, and we also had a lot of customers out on the East Coast, like I showed on the slide, large number of banks, largest stock exchange, and so I was having dinner with a customer, and there must have been a couple of bankers sitting at the next table, and this whole Brocade discussion was happening. They said, there's a lot of rumors about IBM's going to buy a company with the name B. Okay? And everybody thought it was going to be Brocade. Nobody thought it was going to be B&T, right? Because Brocade's size and the fact that they had acquired Foundry, etc. But things seem to be different. But look, I spent 12 years of my career working at HP and I don't know how many times it got thrown out of customers' offices. When I used to try and sell them Unix servers, when the world was about mainframe computers, water-cooled machines that cost millions of dollars. And here I was walking in with an air-cooled machine under $100,000 that ran this operating system called Unix. And that did not take 2 hours to boot, you know. People would look at me and say, you know, you obviously don't know what you're talking about, so there's the door and make sure it doesn't hit you on the way out. And in the server world, it took a good 10 years for people to understand the benefits of this technology. And then Linux came and did the same thing to Unix. Right? I think the networking world has had that same problem. You've had, very respectfully, one dominant player that has become the dinosaur of the networking world. Enjoys 80% market share. You know, everybody else made the mistake of pricing within 10-15% of them. So there was a wonderful ecosystem, right? I used to work at Nortel. We used to show market share slides by taking out Cisco's market share so everybody else's could be amplified on the chart. Right? We used to have discussions around the other part of the pie. Right? There was Cisco was 80%, and then let's talk about who has the rest. Right? Well, I think the networking world has gotten to the same point that the server world was 10 years ago, where people want change. They want faster performance, they want better throughput, they want lower latency, they want dramatically lower cost. Right? Dramatically lower cost. And I think that has afforded companies like Blade Network Technologies, even Force 10, the opportunity to enter into that market. I think some companies executed better than others, but I think that opportunity is there. But those are the pressing issues. It's the same ones that people in the server or the storage world did.
Okay, we're going to have one more question, just from another IBM over there.
Hi, Vikram.
Another
Full
IBM.
disclosure, yes.
There's a third IBM.
I came to IBM through an acquisition as well, so we'll talk more about that later offline. But my question is, of course, your presentation was very inspirational, and I'm sure people will say "Paisa vasool." But specifically, you mentioned about being parsimonious with money as a startup entrepreneur. How do you acquire talent and retain talent with that mindset?
Okay, so you will not be able to acquire and retail talent with the be stingy mindset, right? I always believed, growing up inside of HP, I was very fortunate to be pulled along by managers and put into jobs that I was not ready for. I used to describe this concept as you have to find people that are a little wet behind the ears and have a little bit of moss because they don't know how to clean themselves. Because these people are moldable. You can teach them what to do, you can coach them, versus getting the rock star. I used to have these discussions with my board about rock stars because they wanted to go out and, hire the best recruiting company, to hire some exotic talent because they said, Vikram, we want you to build a team of rock stars. And I would say, the only thing I know about rock stars is they tear up waterbeds in hotels. They leave unpaid bills, okay? And they leave a lot of broken hearts with their groupies. And that what you really need is a functioning team, right? The rock star is the team versus the individual. It's a very sadistic thing for it's almost like an aphrodisiac for the venture capitalist to sort of say you gotta have the rock star on the team. I fought that very, very successfully. I would be frugal in all sorts of ways. Everybody travels coach. There's going to be no extravagant offices or all these sorts of things. There's no guaranteed raises, but you will get hefty bonuses if the company makes its results, and pay at market. Pay at market, or even a little bit better. It's never a good idea to, I have never believed that it's a good idea to hire people for cheap. Every year that we operated as a company, there was at least a half a dozen reps that made more money than I did. And I would stand these guys up and make absolute heroes out of them. Because they deserve to be there. And every time my venture capitalists wanted to, or my investors wanted to go see a client, there were other companies in the portfolio that would take them to clients in Barcelona and every place else. Every time they wanted to see a client of mine, I would offer up 2 locations. I would offer up Bentonville, Arkansas, to go see Walmart. Happened to be a big client. And I would offer up the federal penitentiary in Virginia in the month of December. You know, which also didn't have any good exotic hotel location within 30 miles. So that's where I would save money.
Last question. Let me give you an opportunity.
So Vikram, you've gone through lots of ups and downs in your career, and given all that you have learned now, and given again on the family side and the professional side, if you were given an option to again go back, revisit history and take this journey once again, is it something that you would repeat?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, clearly along the way, I think I could do some things smarter. I would do some things better, not the least of it, which is to, you know, spend a little bit more time with my family. But I have to tell you, I think, tough as it might have been for a number of years after having left Hewlett-Packard and all of the comforts of that big company environment, I think I became more streetwise. I learned a great deal of the outside world than I would have inside of HP. Because, you know, a large company has got a lot of checks and balances. So you've got a lot of crutches holding you up, okay? And I've been a firm believer, I think through my own experiences, that you learn a lot more when you get hurt and when you fail than you do when you succeed. So yes, I would do it, and I would kind of come back to, you know, this, like I said right at the very start, I was always a non-conformist, right? The student my teachers never wanted to have in class, but I think it was a little bit of that rebel in me that kind of wants me to keep going out.
Vikram, thank you so much. First of all, super inspiring, highly practical. I mean, I'm pretty sure every word that you uttered was very, very well received by all of us. So thank you very much for that. So I have a question now. This is about the culture. Don't think you really talk about it. You talk about the culture you created in your company after you took over and all that kind of stuff. But what has happened is that, as you know, historically, since you've been a student of history, I could gather that A lot of companies, large companies acquiring a small company, highly promising, just perfect culture, just a go-getter team, everything is just well-oiled machinery, success, all that kind of stuff. And there have been just a lot of stats that these people, large company, they destroy the culture, they destroy the company, they destroy the value. Of course, congratulations, because you now 1 year, your second year now in the running for you, and you've done an admirable job. So could you talk about that? How is that IBM culture, the large company culture, versus your culture and your spirit, and how do you foresee that you influencing them versus getting influenced by them on that side a little bit? Thank you.
There's a few IBM colleagues here that have been here, several decades at IBM. Jokes about, one talks about being there 30 years, and it was like, and I think he was asking Kirti, my wife, at a social gathering a few weeks ago, that I was not present, and she said, how long has he been there? And she must have said 1 year. So I have now developed this art. Every time I talk to IBMers inside, they say I've been